As an avid Souls enjoyer, I can't help but get excited whenever I see a new Souls-like get announced. I realize most of these will never amount to the likes of From Software, but I always love seeing passionate people who are inspired by these amazing games and see what each of them can bring to the table. Lies of P had an incredible weapon system where you can change the handles with different blades, The Surge had an awesome dismemberment and upgrade system, and Mortal Shell had this unique shell idea where you would play as completely different heroes. And in comes another Crab's Treasure, an adorable looking Souls-like where you play as a crab underwater fighting to get his home back. I've had my eye on this since day one because the simple premise of being able to swap shells that have different abilities seemed absolutely brilliant. And I can happily report it's as awesome as it seemed. While not perfect, I think this game is very special and will resonate with Souls fans and even some non-alike. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this game looks and feels very similar to a Souls-like. You have your dodge and roll, light and heavy attack, which you do not have at the start. You kill enemies to collect souls, which in this case are called microplastics, which you will then use to level up your stats. You of course have your lock-on mechanic, resting places that are essentially bonfires where you will reset enemy spawn locations. All in all, pretty standard stuff, but what makes this game different is these shells, and it is easily one of my favorite parts, if not my favorite part of the entire game. But let's look at a couple other gameplay mechanics first, because there are a few key differences here. For starters, you have both a health bar and a shell bar, and you can hold a specific button to block, and if it is a normal hit, your shell will take 100% of the damage. And if you take too much damage, your shell will completely break and you will be shellless and take significantly more damage. Now this will often lead to scrambling mid-engagement to find another shell. Usually during bosses, there are several around, which is very nice. But what's even cooler is all of them have unique special abilities. For example, there is a sushi shell, and its ability is called Munch, which you will eat some of it and then you will actually regain some of your health, but of course at the cost of your shell health. Or you have this shotgun shell, which will completely explode and do massive damage, but at the cost of the entirety of the shell. It's very high risk, high reward. There are even tissue boxes which will heal all status effects because you know there is a swamp level in here. Screw you, Aggro Crab. There's tennis balls, bottle caps, shot glasses, solo cups. There is so much to choose from and they all feel super unique. And they even have weights ranging from small, medium, and large, and each will affect your dodge. I think these developers knew this would be a big selling point for some people, and I think they absolutely nailed this part. You of course also have a skill tree to get additional abilities like a parry, a throwable fork, and one of my favorites where you can combine shells with your fork. And if you've played Bloodborne, this is very similar to the Kirk Hammer, and they have even stated this is exactly where the inspiration came from. I think that is super cool. As far as the core gameplay goes, that also feels wonderful. With the exception of a few major, and I mean major frame rate drops, this game was consistently locked at 60 frames a second, and for the most part played smooth as butter. Hitting enemies felt great, and there was also some pretty decent amount of enemy variety, which kept things fresh the whole way through, so I was left pretty satisfied. There were some platforming sections in here that I thought were pretty good for the most part. One of my only negatives is that there were several moments where the camera got really wonky. I'd be trying to jump from place to place and it just wigged out. Or if I was in a pipe and I was locked onto an enemy, I would be viewing like outside of it. Again, this only happened a few times, but I figured it was worth mentioning. And only a few minor times during a boss battle, they would jump towards me and my camera completely spazzed out. And as I also mentioned before, I did have some major frame rate dips. Now, I initially wrote in my review that this was only during one section because this kind of happened probably around like the 5 or 6 hour mark originally. But once I hit like that 14, 15 hour mark, there was several sections that this happened to, which I found super unfortunate. Luckily, this was never during actual gameplay or boss battles. This was almost like every time I would walk into like a new area. These are all minor in comparison to what I liked in my overall enjoyment, but I did feel I needed to point these out. Overall, I thought the gameplay was super polished and these guys definitely did great work. But is it really Souls-like without the... Now, I was genuinely curious when I first heard about this because they really wanted to be clear that this was in fact a Souls-like. And I'm not sure if it was just the nature of the art style, but to be honest, I really doubted after a while that this was going to have any amount of kick to it. Even a few hours in, and I had only died like a number of times, but I can now confirm this game has the sauce. Right around what it seemed to be like the first major boss, I got my teeth kicked in over and over and over again until I was so close to breaking my controller, then a sudden smirk formed on my face. I started to memorize attack patterns, use all of my abilities that I had earned, and around the 20th time or so, I finally achieved victory. And the satisfaction was, of course, amazing. And after that point, it felt like most of the major bosses were giving me some version of grief. There was no way to spam attack your way to victory, which is exactly how I like these games. Now, there were a few sections where I felt the difficulty spike was a little insane, or on the opposite, just a little too easy. Sometimes I felt there was an overwhelming amount of enemies on screen for no reason. And a majority of enemies and bosses have this blue and red attack, and even being leveled up sometimes, getting hit by one of these, even while blocking, would completely one-shot you, which I sometimes found to be a little frustrating, but again, these are just minor nitpicks. Now, what does separate this game from others is there are a number of accessibility options for newcomers. This is ranging from minor gameplay changes like enemies doing less damage or you giving slightly more, even having a slight buff to your shells, just something to give you some slight assistance, all the way up to completely busted shell that will one-shot every single enemy. Yes, including bosses. I feel like some diehard From Software fanboys are going to find this annoying and cry that they need to get good instead. I think this is perfectly fine. All of these are completely optional, and they're supposed to open doors for more people to become fans of these kind of games. Now, not that this is usually a talking point in Souls games, but how exactly is the story in Another Crab's Treasure is extremely basic but incredibly charming, and way more involved than a typical Souls game. You play as a crab named Krill whose home has been stolen by a loan shark. Then you spend the rest of your game trying to retrieve that back. Now, this game does have some voice acting, which seemed to be pretty solid overall, but one of my favorite things was this cheeky back and forth banter and their real tongue-in-cheek humor. Something simple like the receipts being from C&D Pharmacy and the shell, the legal brick. The world and characters just never failed to make me laugh throughout my entire playthrough, and I always thought it was a joy. Again, because Souls games usually lack pretty heavily in this area and they're always so dark and gritty, I loved seeing a lighter side to this. But what is a Souls-like without good? The bosses in Another Crab's Treasure I found to be very enjoyable for the most part. I felt they were all as difficult as they needed to be. I'm a sucker for multi-phase bosses, and a majority of them had that. Like I said before, there was absolutely no way to spam attack your way through most of these, and I loved that. There's a pretty good variety as far as the looks, the locations, set pieces. There's also a ton of optional and missable bosses, which I find super fun. And it just made me want to explore this world even more. One of my favorite parts was after dying to a boss, it actually has this option to respawn right before the boss, so there is no annoying backtracking, and your microplastics spawn and can be retrieved right before even trying the boss. Incredible. As far as any extra negatives go, I really did not enjoy the map of this game, unfortunately. There is no way to zoom in or out, and it only shows you like a preview of it based on your current location. This left navigation feeling just a little bit frustrating at times because all you have is a compass. Also, when locking onto an enemy, they made the choice to have these black bars show up. I'm not sure why. I think Hellblade also did this. I found it super annoying, but silver lining, these can be turned off. But I unfortunately did not find that out until way later in the game. Another Crab's Treasure retails for $30, and with around 20 to 30 hours of this high content, I absolutely think this is worth picking up day one, especially if you're a fan of Souls games and Souls-likes. I think this is super high quality, keeping the things that we love the most about Souls games while mixing their own unique ideas to keep it fresh. I am extremely excited to see what these guys do next. I think Aggro Crab did an absolutely fantastic job with this. Make sure to check out Another Crab's Treasure on April 25th. This is coming to PlayStation, Xbox, and will even be available on Game Pass and Nintendo Switch. But make sure to check it out and let me know what you think in the comments.